corn than it is to try and go into the city and have to mitigate around perhaps brownfields or abandoned buildings or blighted areas. It's hard for a developer to do that. And therefore it's cheaper to go out into the green fields and develop. But that's where your local zoning comes into effect, because we can't just allow any development to occur. It has to be the right kind of development. Because what we're seeing is we're losing our farmlands and our natural lands to other uses at an astronomical rate. So we need to look at zoning as a mechanism, as one mechanism, because we're going to talk about this big toolbox. And there are a lot of tools that we can use to help us. But zoning is one of those. And that is one that we can use in our toolbox to help mitigate some of the impacts that you receive from development on agriculture. Because we don't want the development in the agricultural areas. We want that for food. So one of the ways that we can help reduce some of the impact on agricultural land is a mechanism called cluster development. And this is where we can look at ways to minimize the impact, knowing that growth is inevitable. We need it. That happens. We hear that a lot, that, well, we can't stop growth. Everybody needs a house. We have to find a place for these people to live. And growth is good for the economy. And yes, it absolutely is. But I think that what we need to be cautioned by is the fact that not all growth is good growth. Not all growth is smart growth. There is some dumb growth out there. So the way that we determine whether it's smart is we look at its long-term impact. So when you start looking at development in a certain area, is that in 10 and 15 and 20 years still going to have the same positive impact to our economy as it is in the short term? And if you can answer yes to that, then I would say that's a good option for development. If you say no, because the impacts of the roads and the sewers and the infrastructure that it's going to take to maintain it is going to be too costly, then that is not smart growth. So the picture that I have up here, I really like to look at this, because we want this. We want to strive for this, where we have the same number of units down here as we do over here. But if you look at how much natural area is around this side, there's hardly any. But yet, can we accomplish the same thing, have the same number of units, but look at the amount of open space and natural lands we have around here? This is a way that we can accomplish both. This is also, I love this slide or this picture, because we can minimize the impact on agriculture and still accommodate growth. That is a very easy question to answer, because it is yes. And if you look at, this is an actual development that had occurred in, I think this was Indiana, where many local units, and this is quite common, is they would do a minimum lot size of 5 acres. So they have a 100-acre lot here, and they divided it up into 20 5-acre lots. So if you look at the impact around here, this would be 100 acres that was completely taken out of agricultural production. What would that same impact be if you took those same 20 houses and you clustered them on a 1/4 acre? You're still accommodating the same number of homes, but look at the amount of land that you would still keep in production. By doing this cluster development, we're able to accommodate both agriculture and both development. So it's a win-win. Now, this scenario, although positive, is not always conducive in all areas. We would certainly need to look at it if you are building those 20 acres on a 1/4 acre lot, and the property that's just to the north of here is a large dairy, probably not the best place to put it. So we still need to be aware of what is going on around and make sure that it fits. So what we have found, unfortunately, in Michigan, and most of the Midwest for that matter, is that we're really good at sprawl. We're really good at taking up our best farmland, our highest quality farmland, and turning it into housing developments. And the sad thing is that Michigan, we tend to take it for granted, but we are a powerhouse when it comes to agriculture. We don't see that much, but we're the second next to California for the diversity of products that we have and that we have the ability to grow, which is incredible. Because if you look at the amount of land that we have and what we're able to grow on it, it surpasses 48 other states. That's huge. So it's something that we need to really consider, because if we continue to convert this high quality farmland and we can't recognize that we need to protect it, then we will lose much of our agricultural industry. And like I said, and I'm going to get into this a little bit more in terms of the economic impact of agriculture, we are a powerhouse. Unfortunately, we're not always seen or recognized that way. Another option to consider when you're looking at this conversion, because sometimes it's a hard argument sometimes to go in and sit in front of a committee, which I've done several times, and argue why farmland should be valued higher than development. That on its own merit sometimes doesn't get everybody's attention. But usually the folks that are sitting in the seats of power, and they're the ones that are making the decisions, they're always very conscious about budgets. It all comes down to money. And usually that's one of the reasons why we see a lot of farmland converted, is because there's this misconception that development is going to bring in more revenue to our townships and our municipalities. We're going to line our coffers a little bit more if we can get development, because they pay more in taxes. But when we really dive into the costs of development, what we're finding is the reverse. It's actually flipped. And there have been numerous studies that have proven this, that when you take a piece of agricultural land and you convert it to another use, when you look at the amount of taxes that that property pays, for every $1 in revenue that that property pays, agriculture only demands 37 cents in services. So they're actually paying more than what they're getting in return in services. Now, residential and development, if you take that same dollar that everybody is paying, residential actually demands $1.16 in services. So they're actually using more services than they're receiving, than they're paying in. And this goes back to this map. When you think about the cost, when you move into a rural area, let's take just one of those 5-acre lots in that home. They're moving out into that rural area wanting to get that rolling hills, the rural character, what everybody wants. But yet they still want the amenities that come with living in town. So take, for example, you're a garbage truck driver and your route is this 100-acre field. How long do you think it's going to take you to run through all 20 of those units on 100 acres? Then how long is it going to take you to run your route on 20 homes on a quarter-acre, or quarter-acre lots on 1 acre? You're going to be able to be far more efficient in this scenario than you will be in this scenario. This scenario costs money. It's simple efficiency. And that's where we come back to with this cost of services. It costs municipalities more money to convert to residential than it does to stay ag. It's actually cheaper for them to stay agricultural than it is to convert to residential. Now, although zoning is a really great tool, and it's one that I do promote a lot because it's really beneficial, I think there are some downsides to zoning that we need to really consider. And that is that you have this permanent venue versus a flexible venue. And zoning is flexible. Even though they're laws and they are intended to be permanent, zoning boards change because, again, we're governing ourselves. These boards are representatives of people in your community. These are your neighbors, your teachers, your children that are serving on these boards and making these decisions. And they're making these decisions based on what they feel is the best choice for their communities. But zoning boards can change, elections can change, political will can change, which means one board may very much value agriculture, may very much recognize the benefits of agriculture, but they may get voted out, and that new board coming in says, you know, I think we're going to make more money turning us into houses, and that's what I think we should do. And they can turn those policies over. So although zoning is a really great tool, it is just one tool, and there does demand to have some permanence. Because if you think about an agricultural operation, which many of you, I'm sure, are very familiar with, that's not something that you can change quickly. Agriculture is something that takes a long time to cultivate. It is a long-term business and venture. So we need permanent solutions if you're going to invest in that operation. And the only way that you're going to grow and be successful in any business is you have to invest in it. And if you are an agricultural operator and you're looking at investing in your farm, let's say you're a dairy, and you're going to increase your herd size and you're going to build a new parlor and you're going to invest in your operation to make it more efficient, more profitable. But you look around you of what's going on and you see a house here, a house here, a house here. Are you going to be as eager to make an investment knowing that those non-farm neighbors might down the road be complaining about the odors that are coming from your farm? Probably not. That would be a factor, I think, that you would take in when considering investing in your operation. So if that operation was looking across the field and seeing other agricultural operations, I think they would be more comfortable making that investment because they know that agriculture is going to stay. And therefore they can make investments so that they can have that long-term business environment. So what we have found as a solution to zoning and the flexibility of zoning is what are called conservation easements. And this is, I think, more of what Mr. Sheridan was talking about with your project, is there are many forms of a conservation easement. And the conservation easement, it's a mechanism to permanently preserve land. And it can cover many different types of land. There are conservation easements that protect riparian areas. There are conservation easements that protect working lands, which include agriculture, wood lots, and tree lots. And there are conservation easements that protect natural lands, which are more, they're not productive, they're not producing a commodity, but yet they're still as valuable in terms of their environmental benefits. So let's dive into that just a little bit and how a conservation easement can impact the land around it and kind of what that means. So we generalize conservation easements. You'll hear that term a lot, but really what we're talking about is farmland preservation, right? Or land preservation. I intertwine those sometimes with farmland and open space preservation. But really what we're talking about are mechanisms to permanently protect farmland. So what we saw in the 70s was this rise of a subdivision where we saw them popping up all over the place, and particularly on the East and West coasts, right? Because that's where that was where the mecca of industry was really occurring. And so we saw a lot of development, a lot of farmland converted and lost. And everybody in the country was talking about this trend And what do we do about it? Because even in the 1970s, they could see that this train was leaving the station and we needed to do something about it, or else we were not going to have agriculture in our state. And so what Michigan decided to do was enact PA 116. And this is a fairly common term. You may hear your parents talking about it or neighbors, but it is a way that they can temporarily protect farmland. This is not a permanent conservation easement. This is a temporary conservation easement. That is the way and the path that Michigan chose to move forward with preservation. They were just a little nervous about permanent preservation. Everybody, when you start talking about that being permanent and that not being able to do what you want with your land, people got real uneasy. And so they decided that the temporary covenant was the way to go. Meanwhile, the East and West Coasts decided that permanent was absolutely the way they needed to go. And so they started buying land using conservation easements, which is the permanent mechanism for preserving farms. So what we started doing in Michigan is looking at these East Coast states and their programs and what they were doing and saying, they're actually doing a better job at preserving their farmland than we are. Because PA 116, although it was a temporary fix, you could still get out of it and you could still convert it to housing. So we went out to Maryland, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey and learned what they had been doing out in those states. And we tried to bring that back to Michigan and implement that in Michigan. So we developed these programs, and there's about 32 right now in the state of Michigan, and they're mainly county-run programs. So Ingham County has a program, Kent County has one, Berry County, Clinton County, there's a slew of them in the state. And what they're doing is they're permanently protecting land using conservation easements. A conservation easement is a mechanism, it's a deed restriction. Right. So the way I like to explain this, it's kind of like mineral rights. When we talk about you can sever your right to drill and extract minerals from your property. As a landowner, you have that right. And if you look down at the picture that I have, there's a bundle of rights that comes with every property. Mineral rights is one of them, riparian rights are another. Your right to develop, your right to sell your farm and get paid for that is one stick in that bundle of rights, and that can be severed and sold. So what you're doing is the government is paying you to take away that stick and put a permanent conservation easement on your property. So it's a voluntary program. And that's one thing I want to be very clear about is this is not the government coming in and saying, you shall not develop, because no, we can't do that. We live in a capitalist society. We have private property rights, and we're very proud of that. And I think it's one of the reasons why our country has been so successful. So this is a way that this is a voluntary program. It would be just as voluntary if a landowner wanted to sell it for development or if they wanted to sell it to the government to be preserved. But the unique thing about selling it to the government to be preserved is that you still own that property. You still hold title to that property. All you've done is sold a stick in that bundle of rights. You've only severed a small portion of that right. So you can still do whatever you want on that property. You can farm it. You can let it go fallow if you want. You could put a new operation on it that was conducive to agriculture. You simply can't build a subdivision on it. And that's all that conservation easement does. So one of the things that I like to talk about when we're talking about the benefits of farmland preservation is it's a three-legged stool. It's very easy to see that you have social benefits, you have environmental benefits, but to me, I think the most important benefit is the economic benefit. Again, because we're back to a capitalist society. We have to have a strong, thriving economy in order to be successful. And so the economics of farmland preservation, I think, is the biggest benefit that we will see as a society to this permanent preservation. And I'll explain why. And again, talk about this, that ag preservation, pumping money back into the ag economy by purchasing these easements, is economic development. When we look at the market value, and this is just in mid-Michigan, so this is just very much in our backyard, it's over $420 million industry per year. That's huge. That's up there rivaling manufacturing in this area. And that can often be multiplied sevenfold from the farm gate to the food plate. So when you have a product and you sell it from your farm, as it moves through the food chain, it's going to multiply in value sevenfold before it actually reaches the product in the food plate. It's created over 5,000 jobs. It's very critical to this new local food movement that we're seeing, the farm to fork movement, and knowing where your food is coming from. It's a huge benefit to that. Dollar for dollar, if we were to see a 5% increase in ag sales, that would equal $3.4 million in labor income, $5.7 million in property income, and 259 new jobs. So it's an additional, this would be in addition to that 420 million, $22 million of economic output. And I know that that's a lot of numbers and a lot to throw at you, but I'll just leave you with, that's huge. Other industries struggle to come up with those numbers, and agriculture pumps that out year after year after year, which is why I think we have a struggle with our governance taking us somewhat for granted, because we're there. We are always that steady economic contributor. When things are lopsided in all of our other economies, agriculture seems to be steady. It's a strong return on your investment. One of the examples that I like to give, and I do this because this, I think, is because it's local. It's one that we can actually see and touch, and you can really recognize the impact of agriculture. And this is the Michigan turkey producers. And so I was the coordinator for the Kent County Farmland Preservation Program for about 6 years. And I did numerous tours to the Michigan turkey producers. They are a large cooperative of growers, and they grow and process turkeys, right? So if you go into Costco and you buy a container of their turkey, their deli meat, if you flip it over, more than likely you're going to see that it's coming from the Michigan turkey producers. By far, I would encourage this to be one of the tours that you would take. I was very, very impressed with this operation and how they treat the animals. They have been recognized all over the country for their animal welfare and their attention to detail with animal behavior. It's very fascinating, I find. But I think one of the biggest arguments of why the Michigan turkey producers is such a great industry isn't because of the turkey that they produce, but it really paints a strong picture of why we need farmland preservation. Because without the land base, this operation would not even happen. So if we were to take this math problem, and I'll go through this really quickly because I know that I can lose some people with these, but Michigan turkey producers on average processes 5 million birds annually. So if you look at the average tom bird to take from hatching to the time that they are ready for processing, that tom will consume 1 bushel of corn, about 56 pounds. They're going to consume 20 pounds of soybean meal. So if you look at what it takes to supply the food for 5 million birds, when 1 tom consumes that much, it will take over 30,000 acres of corn, 37,000 acres of soybeans. You're looking at 67,000 acres that it's going to take to support this agribusiness. And what we see is we build on top of each other. We have to have the land base in order to have all of our agribusinesses be successful as well. So one of the reasons that I think this is such a great example is because without farmland preservation, we would not be able to have Michigan turkey producers. So I will quickly brush over a little bit of what Ingham County has done. So Ingham County was the first farmland and open space preservation millage in Michigan, meaning we went to our voters and asked them to pay for farmland and open space preservation, because this isn't something that we expect landowners to just give us. We pay them for it. So we passed the ordinance in 2004. We had our primary election in August 5th of 2008. We were asking for 0.14 mils for 10 years. And I know that that gets a little confusing. So basically what it is when you pay your taxes every year, a portion of that tax is going to pay for farmland and open space preservation. And what we figured is annually, it's about $7 a year for the average household. So it costs you maybe a trip to McDonald's to help preserve farmland and open space in Ingham County every year. It's really cheap.
Mrs. Byers, really I apologize for interrupting, but I am gonna, we've got about 30 seconds to a minute left of class. So I'm gonna, I'm gonna have you wrap up really quickly. If you would send me this presentation, we're gonna go through it. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. So just for you students, you have a question in your Google Classroom, which is simply, what is your question for Mrs. Byers? I need you to put a question in there. That's your assignment for today. You need to come up with one question.
Students who will be riding the bus home.
I'll see you tomorrow. Have a great, for those of you who are okay to leave, that's not everybody. Everybody else takes that. Folks who are online, thank you for being here. Have a great day. I will see you back here again tomorrow. Stacy, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'm gonna put together questions and maybe send some of those to you. If you can help us work through those, that would be amazing. And I have no doubt that we'll have you back, if not next week before spring break, then probably after.
Sounds good.
I appreciate it so much. Thank you.
Sure. All right.